Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking Magazine's bi-weekly podcast. I'm senior web producer Ed Pernick, and joining me today are executive art director Mike Pekovich.
Hey guys.
Senior editor Matt Kenny.
What's up?
And woodworker and actor Nick Offerman. More on that later.
Hey Nick. Hey guys.
Now, as always, I always start the show with a pitch. Please, 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 if you like this podcast, spread the word to your fellow woodworkers. Stop by our iTunes page, leave a comment, 5-star rating. You can catch us at iHeartRadio. You know the drill. We can't get bigger and better without your help. So get on that, please. I'll be reviewing your efforts shortly. So we have an interesting segue topic, Mike,
Yes.
involving you.
Oh.
And Matt, pardon me, that was my iPhone. So Matt, would you? I'll just please
Well, I'm not
chat amongst yourselves.
I'm not making a big deal of it.
No, not at all.
I'm just making known that in a past episode we discussed my effort to make 52 boxes in 52 weeks.
And beer remuneration.
There was something about that, yes, and people with no sense of humor didn't like that conversation, so they may want to tune out or fast forward. I have just recently posted to my website.
Wait. What was it now? What did Mike believe that you were going to make?
Oh, yes. And you two knuckleheads decided you would have a bet. How many boxes would I actually make in 52 weeks?
The over-under number.
The over-under. Mike's over-under number was, do you remember, Mike?
I probably said 26.
You did say 26.
Okay.
Yes.
I stand by that number.
You do.
Are you sure? And, well.
Because I just posted to my website box number 26 last week. And Mike, much to your chagrin, I know because Mike's still holding out that I'm somehow going to completely fall down over the next 32 weeks.
So it's the beginning of September, and you're halfway there.
Yes, and I've only been doing it for 18 weeks.
So Mike needs to start going beer shopping.
Yes.
Well,
Box 27 will be completed tonight.
I believe I said 40.
Yes, yours was in the 40s somewhere.
I believe it was 40. We'll see how that pans out.
so 26 boxes so far in how many weeks? You said 18 weeks?
18 weeks.
Hats off. Awesome. I will definitely buy beers for that.
Bottle caps off.
So now whether you actually get to 50, that's a whole
Well,
another matter.
here's some more bad news for you, Mike. Right now.
Now, remember we said it didn't count if you geared up and you made 40 boxes at the last minute.
I didn't say that.
That counted as one box.
Well, first of all, it's not the last minute.
They have to have separate and distinct souls.
What are you, George Nakashima?
Yes.
I am currently making 39 boxes at once.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
You've got a regular factory there.
Yeah, I'm cranking them out for a gallery.
All right.
So that's going to put me over. No, I'm
Well,
not going to count them.
Actually, I get 2 of those.
Yes, 2 of those are for
Yeah.
Mike, 2 of those are for a family friend, and the rest are for a gallery and for sale on my website.
Awesome.
I'm sure our 7 listeners are finding this riveting. So I'll
Our southern listeners?
our 7 listeners.
our 7 listeners.
So I'll just move into the first question of the week. All right, let's get out of this
We're not
shaming.
talking about noodling for catfish, so we don't probably have any listeners in the South.
All right, here. Wow, only a Southerner could get away with saying that. All right, so first question of the week comes from Jeff, who wrote, "A touch over 2 years ago, with just enough woodworking knowledge to be dangerous and not enough time to learn any better, I volunteered to spearhead a project for the architecture firm where I work. The project involved simply flattening and smoothing a series of large slabs of red oak, which would then be laid in a continuous chain across a series of walls, forming one long desk for 6 people. However, I was surprised to find that the slabs were fresh from the ground only a matter of weeks before. To call them green would be a touch of understatement. I warned all who would listen that the slabs still had a great deal of movement yet to come. However, as I didn't have several years to let them season, I had to fire up the router and get the slabs flat. 2 years hence, let's just take a guess
What's happening?
where this is going.
Not to mention that these slabs, when he worked them and hung them, they must
Yes.
have weighed like 800
He
pounds
did.
apiece.
He said that
Yeah.
I edited his question a bit to shorten it, but yeah, he said they weighed a ton.
Yeah, soaking wet wood is not light.
So, however, I was 2 years hence in a conditioned office, coupled with having only applied finish to the fronts and tops. It has caused the once flat 2¼ inch thick by 24-inch by 84-inch slabs to cup up into shallow canoes, leaving every desk in the shape of a small U. Putting a steel rule across the 24-inch width reveals at least a 5/8 gap below the middle of the rule. The cup tops are starting to get ridiculous. I should think so. My idea to reflatten them involves flipping them over, flattening the bottom, which would then become the new top, and preserving the 2¼ inch edge profile. This, of course, would leave the middle of the desk much thinner than the ends. My question, finally indeed, what effects would this new profile have on the slabs? I fear the uneven thicknesses between the sides and middle might exacerbate my problem or cause blah, 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 blah. So,
Ed.
Jeff, after reading your treatise on cups, tabletops,
Yes. Well,
okay.
first of all, what they really should do
is
is
not
that-
what he's thinking.
Right, but every principal in that architectural firm, in other words, the partners,
Yes.
should be forced to use those
I was thinking
desks
fired.
for their impertinence and indifference to
Jeff.
Jeff's warnings
Exactly.
as
I
a
agree.
punishment. Yes, but that won't happen.
And Jeff should be made a partner
And
if
Jeff
he isn't
should be
already.
a partner. Yes,
All right.
I have my solution.
What would you do?
I would take them down and use them for canoes. No, I would take them down, split them down the middle, joint and plane them again flat, and then glue them back together.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to lose a little bit of thickness, but not much.
How much?
Right.
You don't even really.
24 inches, you may go into 3 pieces.
You could go into 3 pieces, and you could really
A little more
just
stable.
joint the top, and don't worry about the bottom. It doesn't really matter.
Right. Flatten up the top,
Square up
square
the
up
edges,
glue it up.
glue it up.
Or you can buy like 150 humidifiers and just saturate this place until
They go flat
they
again.
return to 100% moisture content.
I would like to make an official statement on behalf of Fine Woodworking Magazine directed at the partners of this architectural firm, air quotes.
Yes.
You people are a bunch of bozos, and you should be ashamed of yourselves for not listening to your colleague, Jeff.
All
Mike's,
right,
Mike's cringing.
here's another solution. I actually did this. I taught a dining table class, a hay rake table class, where we had these big old inch-plus thick oak slabs for tops, and one of the students, his top cupped a little bit, maybe a 1/4 inch over the whole length of the top, and we ended up taking the thing, flipping it upside down, getting a circular saw out, and cutting a bunch of stopped grooves along the length of the top. I think we started, I want to say maybe 3/4 inch apart, and then we ended up splitting that difference. So we had like a whole bunch of saw curves on the bottom of this table, but it got rid of that bow. It was able to flatten out.
Yeah.
So if you want to like just kerf the bejesus out of the bottoms of these things, then you may
Not
get
a through
some,
curve.
Not a through curve, because that actually
No.
would be cutting it in half.
Well,
No.
you
I
through the
mean
ends.
not through the ends.
Yeah, you don't want the curves to
Because
show.
one of our colleagues over at Fine Home Building once had to do that on like some sort of solid wood countertop that had completely cupped on him, and he curved the bajungas out of the bottom of that thing.
And that worked, right?
It did work,
Yeah.
but it was a massive pain.
So you may need to get like an angle iron brace or something, or a cleat to run across the width of that to sort of screw it down, but all those curves will give it enough flexibility to flatten that out. And you actually don't even need to take this thing off the wall. Just get that circ saw upside down, lay down on a skateboard or a little machinist dolly, and just like
Have someone
zing.
pull you down.
Yeah.
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 But really, would you really suggest that he do that? I mean, wouldn't it just be easier, let's say, cut it into 3 pieces?
It depends. If you have the capability to rip it, joint it flat, joint the edges, and re-glue it, that's going to save you a lot of trouble. If you want to save the finished surface on top and you don't have the means to cut this down and glue it back up and then flatten it somehow, then the kerfing is a good way to maintain the overall thickness, maintain that top finished surface, and still get it to flatten out just a little bit.
But here's actually, this whole situation is illustrative of a larger point. And this is not meant as a slight to Jeff, who says that he was a beginning woodworker when he did all of this. And it's actually a bit shameful on the company's part, I think, that when you're going to do something, especially if you're a company and you're going to do it, just bite the bullet and pay to have it done correctly the first time. Because if they had, to put Jeff in this guy in the situation was a bit unfair. It's like you just go out and buy the slabs that are dry and do this correctly from the beginning, and then you don't have this problem because they're gonna
end up paying twice as much now.
Well, no, they're
for
not,
the labor when you consider it.
Unless Jeff's doing it during work time, which he should be doing. He shouldn't be doing this for free.
Nice.
Hang in there, Jeff. Let me know how it turns out.
And let me put you in touch with the local union.
All right. The next question comes from Will, who writes, I've volunteered to make a set of bookshelves for my new grandson's room. I've settled on something along the lines of some arts and crafts examples I found online that have a pair of through-wedged tenons on the ends of the shelves. So you're talking about two tenons cut into the end of each side of the shelf, piercing the sides of the bookshelf, and then they're pinned in place with a tusk. When I started fussing about the best way to remove the waste from in between the through tenons while maintaining a crisp, tight fit against the side of the bookshelf, he starts wondering about this, and he says a handsaw for the rip cuts, but what about the cross cuts? So I asked myself, WWMOED, what would Mike or Ed do? Oh, wait, that's interesting. What would Mike or Ed do? Let me just pot you down there, Matt. Right. Anyhow, so what would we do, right? So after his disparaging remarks about arts and crafts, this Yankee tool, quote, end quote, does not give the eastern end of a westbound rat what Matt would do unless it's to go suck a lemon. This is a really hard question to read. Who are you again? Who is this man? What is his name? Will?
Yeah.
Will, this is a tough one to read, but I like it.
A lot of venom.
Let me try saying this again because I really like this. After his disparaging remarks about arts and crafts, this Yankee tool does not give the eastern end of a westbound rat what Matt would do unless it's to go suck a lemon. Instead, he might consider designing a tiny, narrow box to fit his tiny, narrow mind. I really love Matt too, but what the heck? Anyhow, I have some ideas, but I enter a state of indecisive paralysis when it comes down to possibly destroying some nice boards. How would you wise men recommend going about this? So, two squarish-looking through tenons. How do you remove the waste in between them effectively, nice and square and flat?
I think after that, Matt, you should answer this question.
I really should, shouldn't I?
Yes, give him some choice, snarky remarks.
So here's how you solve this problem. First of all, you don't make an ugly arts and crafts bookshelf, and problem solved.
Okay, let me elaborate on that point. The easiest
You don't
thing
like
to
arts
do,
and crafts, huh?
we can. It depends if you want to do this all with hand tools or power tools. If you want to do it with hand tools, get your marking gauge, scribe around top and bottom and the edges, and draw out your tenons, saw the verticals, and saw away from your lines, outside of your scribe line just a little bit. Take a chisel and chisel right back to your scribe lines, and it's good.
Cope out
Yeah.
that waste, most
Use
of
a
it.
coping saw, jigsaw, bandsaw to get rid of the waste in between. Get it within a 1/16 of an inch or so of your scribe line, and sort of chop back to your scribe line. And call it good.
It's similar to what you often do in doing dovetails. You do.
It's exactly
the
like
same
cutting a
thing.
dovetail. It's just a big lot of space between those two dovetails.
He's really so he's concerned about the fit of the shelf against the inside face of the cabinet. So one thing he could do, which would, granted, it would make things maybe a little more complicated, but instead of just doing two...
Quite frankly, Matt, I don't think at this point he cares what you think you should do.
Well,
No, go ahead. I'm
not
just
gonna
kidding.
all right, I'm going to be nice. Instead of doing just two mortises,
Yes.
do in between, connect those mortises with a very shallow
Little dado.
groove or dado, right? Sorry, not a groove, a dado, and
So
do
you
a
can be a
little,
little
haunch.
off.
So you can then use your table saw to cut a shoulder all the way around
Ooh.
and get a nice crisp shoulder, and then you cut your tenons, which would be the same thickness as that little haunch in between them, and then that little the where the haunch into the haunch meets the bottom of the dado. It doesn't really matter if that's perfect or not.
Right.
It's all hidden.
That's
Yep.
elegant.
I've done it that way, and also to your point, the tenons in the picture, they look like they're unshouldered top to bottom, which makes it, that's why I went the scribe line. But if you can just skim a really sort of shallow shoulder, top and bottom, and
Yeah.
along the edges, that gives you a nice registration point for your chisel too. Whether you leave a haunch or then cut out the waist and chop right back to the line, that little shallow shoulder gives you a purchase for that chisel, so you're not undercutting that baseline.
Yeah, I don't see. I mean, why he can't do a shoulder? There's no reason not to do a shoulder, right? I mean, it's not
Unless
really
you
gonna-
want like a really big, thick tenon, but even then,
You
even
could do a
like a
16th of an
16
inch.
shoulder is going to give you a cleaner joint on that inside face.
Yeah, exactly.
These are both awesome solutions. So I think we got him covered. So let's move on to our first segment of the day. This is going to be our interview segment for this episode, and it's going to be a fellow who's appeared in the magazine before. I usually refer to him as a woodworking actor. Nick Offerman, most people, obviously, I'm not going to belabor this, but most people know him from Parks and Rec. He's also appeared in Deadwood, and he's a pretty versatile actor. And he is about to come out with his third book. So his first book was Paddle Your Own Canoe. The second book was Gumption, which had these little chapters on various people who he respects across different universes. So he's got George Washington in there. He's got George Nakashima in there. He's got another woodworker I happen to know who shall remain unnamed in there that he talks about.
There was someone that we know very well that was mentioned quite. It was mentioned
he's seated at this table.
He spoke very kindly
All
of
right.
that person.
Obviously, Matt's talking about me. And
Yeah,
no, it's our very own Matt Kenny.
that's right. I was not one of the people he
No,
featured.
but he talked about you in the book,
Yes,
which is pretty cool. And
compared me favorably to Aragorn.
nice. Yeah, so he is a big Lord of the Rings fan,
I'm
Yes.
hating life right now.
That's right.
yeah, as is Mike.
Yeah.
And he's going to, I just wanted to put this out there, he's working on his third book, which is going to center around people's workshops. So more to come on that. We'll keep you posted on that. But so here he is, our own fine woodworking slab specialist, Nick Offerman, talking to Asa Christiana.
All right, it's a fine day here in LA at the Offerman Wood Shop, but then again, it's almost always a fine day in Southern California if you can survive the fires and the drought and what else, Nick?
The traffic.
Yeah, if you can survive all that stuff. We're having a Negro Modelo each. Let's clink. That's for real.
Yes, the tools are down.
The tools are down. We just got done shooting an article about how Nick approaches slab furniture, which you guys will see in a very soon upcoming issue. So let's start there. So how did you get started using slabs in furniture, Nick?
Gosh, well, you know, I'm very self-taught. I used to be a scenery carpenter, and when I built my first post and beam structure inspired by the architecture of Green and Green, and I realized this is how antique furniture used to be made. If I make these mortises and tenons smaller, I could make a table. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, you should check out Fine Woodworking magazine," and I did, and here we are. I've been besotted for 16 years, and I used to just read it cover to cover. I was so geeked out, I would read every little classified ad. And my wife and I were on vacation in the town of Sonoma, California, Negro Modelo. And I was reading, the classified ads, and I realized that this guy advertising slabs had the same area code to where we were staying. And I, among other things I had been reading about, I had become really obsessed and inspired by the work of George Nakashima, as probably a lot of beginning woodworkers are. I think if you look at the work of the Craftsman movement and Gustav Stickley and then the Shaker period, eventually, when you're looking at simple structures, you come upon Nakashima and Maloof particularly. Here's guys who took these simple structures and gave them an incredible flair and charisma. And so I think even it was just subconscious that I was like, oh, you can make a table with if you can find one slice of a tree, you can make a dope-ass table.
It's almost like cheating.
It is. And And it just also seemed like a Herculean accomplishment, just to acquire a tabletop that was just one slice, like a piece of toast, sliced off of a tree. And so I saw this classified ad in the back of the magazine, and I called the guy, and he was in Calistoga. And the next day I went and saw him, and the next day I loaded my F-250 to higher than the cab with slabs of walnut and bay laurel, and just said, holy cow, now I can try my hand at these Nakashima tables.
Did you really say holy cow?
I said something more prurient than holy cow.
Right.
Like holy crap.
Right. So you say in the article, and it's sort of how you stand out a little bit from the other guys in the article, that your design aesthetic leans toward the beefy, I think you said.
Yeah, I have, for better or worse, you know, like I did a Stickley table for my friend Rainn Wilson, the great and funny actor. He wanted a kitchen table, and so I looked at some different Stickley designs, and I can't help it. I haven't found a woodworker who builds things as thick as I like them. So generally, whatever I do, I just add a little bit of dimension to each of the members. And so Rainn got a table that you could park a Hummer on.
Rainn is the guy who played Dwight Schrute on The Office, right?
Yes. Yeah, he's
funny dude.
I met Rainn, you know, many, many years ago because we were auditioning a lot for the same roles, usually like creep in the basement. And it's funny, like there's usual suspects, but Rainn's intelligence appealed to me, and we sort of palled up, and then it was so thrilling to see him succeed in the way he did, kind of opening the door for a lot of the rest of we creeps in the basement.
I remember seeing him in an interview, and he's really nothing like Dwight Schrute, right? I mean,
no, I mean certainly in terms of like personal style and tone, he's a much more freewheeling. I don't want to accuse him of being a hippie, but he is definitely, I think, would accept being accused of being more of a long hair than Dwight. He's a beautiful man. He's really intelligent, and he's a great poet, and he's super funny. He has incredible theater chops. He had a famous show called, I want to say, The Grand Bozina. That was. I also come from the same kind of underground theater world, and the few friends of his that created this Grand Bozina show were just legends in the world of American theater. And so he's always been kind of heroic to me.
What city was that in?
I think they did it in both New York and L.A.
Cool.
While I was in Chicago.
Yeah.
And so, you hear tell of, there's these freaks in L.A. doing this show that has clowning and commedia dell'arte. And of course, no one will ever get rich off of it, but those who see it are very grateful.
And maybe it led to a job later on for him.
Certainly, either directly or indirectly, it absolutely did.
Before the woodworking audience passes out from all this showbiz talk, I'm interested in it, so I can't help myself. But so let me ask you a highly technical question here about woodworking so we can get this back on track. Right. So when you're building a big slab table, what historical group of people do you picture using it? Would that be Vikings, Anglo-Saxons,
that's a good
or
question.
A fictional, maybe Lord of the Rings characters?
Yeah, I would lean towards the Frodo's ring party gathering around one of my tables. I made a table for my brother when he moved back to Illinois and got his first house with his wife and 2 daughters, and we made him a massive walnut table, and again added an inch to every dimension. My brother deserves it. He's just a thick son of a bitch, and he's now brewing beer at a venerable brewery in Naperville, Illinois, called Solemn Oath, and right now they only are available in like a 300-mile circle around Chicago. But man, if you can get your hands on some, it's crazy.
Do you think he like drinks great flagons of beer on top of the table that you built?
Yeah, it's kind of designed. I was hoping that he would perhaps sacrifice animals upon it. If he were to be so fortunate as to sacrifice Aslan, the lion, the titular lion from C.S. Lewis's Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe series, the table would support the sacrifice of Aslan. And it actually has a check down the middle, so when the altar cracks, it's already covered.
Right, so when you're working with big slabs like these, like you tend to use big Viking slabs that look like they could be in the Parthenon or something. It's a good thing that you have a lot of help around here. So that you run a shop here in LA that is kind of unique. So maybe you could talk about the elves or the helpers and the folks around here who use the shop and why you set up this sort of woodworkers co-op, such as it is.
Sure, yeah. I mean, these days I'm lucky enough to be so busy as an actor that the shop depends completely upon the elves. And I don't mean to use such a diminutive term. It's more Santa's elves, who I consider probably very burly. But they're who are making everything behind the scenes. And we have an incredible group of woodworkers that we've collected sort of off the wind. I mean, when I got the job on Parks and Recreation, I had an inkling that if the show worked, my shop time would suddenly be greatly diminished. And I would have to either shut the doors and turn off the lights, or I'd have to find some people to start using the tools in my stead. And so I started with Lee, who runs the shop. She's an incredibly strong and skilled woodworker in a very small package. And she runs the operation, and together we've collected this sort of ragtag bunch of characters. And my idea was, and my dream for any woodworker is that they can eventually somehow make a living at it. Even the woodworkers that are doing great will probably tell you you're never going to get rich as a woodworker. But right now we have 5 or 6 people working in the shop who live incredibly rich lives, even though their bank account might differ with that description. And so we have a great group of folks, and everybody kind of develops their own products and figures out what they like to do. Some people like small items, some people like slab tables, and everybody kind of fills their niche. And together we supply the inventory for the Offerman Woodshop website.
Nice. And some people can take their own commissions and work on commissions maybe that you get.
Yeah, generally, I mean, it's sort of a co-op in that we're getting commissions from kind of all over the globe by now.
Wow.
And depending on each woodworker's strengths, Lee administrates the operation and says, okay, this person wants a 3-legged stool in England. Josh, you take that.
Right.
This person wants a crazy oversized baseball bat in Kentucky. We're not going to ask any questions, but Thomas, why don't you handle that? And so the commission work continues to pick up. We're also doing high-end, like home design stuff. For some reason, massive butcher block kitchen islands are very in fashion.
That's
right
the hot thing.
Yeah, so we just did one of those in walnut, and it's end grain butcher's block, like an old-fashioned factory floor.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly beautiful and durable, but also super labor intensive.
You're right.
But we snag gigs like that.
You could find a great fine woodworking article about how to balance out all the forces in there and stuff.
I imagine.
I'll send you a link.
Oh, that would be great. I'm a
after
fan.
the fact.
I probably read it 7
You
years
might.
ago.
You probably did.
It's really interesting. Los Angeles is a great market for doing custom work for people's homes, but at the same time, it's a frustrating market because often designers are influenced more by fashion than by practicality.
Yep.
And part of the mission of our shop is that we make things in a handmade way, which doesn't necessarily mean we're making them. It's not Colonial Williamsburg. It's not all with an adze and a
fro.
A fro, yeah. But we do eschew. We have yet to have a dovetail jig in the shop. We generally try not to use CNC technology. All those things are great. It's just not our bag. We want people to be able to tell we made this with our hands.
But you're building stuff to last.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always work with designers who want to change stuff out every 2 years.
Not at all. I mean, they'll order something out of a catalog just as quickly. And I have friends that are designers, and they have openly told me, I have labor shops in downtown LA that'll make this table half as good as yours for a quarter of the price.
Right.
And I have to make that choice for my client,
Right.
And fortunately, we've been able to find a customer base that understands the quality, the heirloom quality of our pieces. That it's the difference between filling your house with objects that are meant to be disposed of versus setting yourself up with furniture that you can pass along to your grandchildren.
You're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
So that makes the shop. You were just telling me today that the shop is now officially self-supporting.
It is autonomous. It's
which has got to be a good feeling to you, both for your pocketbook, but also just like I think that was probably your goal.
It was. I mean, I'm having great fortune as a performer, and so that allows me to maintain my shop with or without the co-op that inhabits it. But if it can be a thriving entity on its own, that's wonderful for everybody involved. And the reason I call it a co-op is because I don't pay wages. These woodworkers don't work for me. Everybody's on an independent contract, and basically they pay a little overhead to the shop fund.
Yep.
So a percentage of everybody's jobs covers the rent and the bills and getting the table.
But then they get paid back job by job for the work they're doing.
Yeah.
Got it.
And they can determine, Maddie makes kazoos for the website, and he can decide if he wants to make 10 a month or 100 a month.
Right.
And that's nice because it allows everybody to have a fluid lifestyle. Matt, for example, works in the entertainment industry, so he's free to go on auditions and be his own boss. He can give himself 20 hours a week or 60.
That's amazing. I want to work here, by the way.
You're welcome.
I just don't want to live in LA.
I hear you.
So, let's talk about finding big slabs, because you have a room full of them in the back, but and you've probably developed a lot of connections. But if someone was just coming to this for the first time, how do they go about finding affordable slabs? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I mean, using woodworking magazines and the internet, you basically cast about in your area. California, all the way up the West Coast, is rich in big old trees. Mm-hmm. And all over the country, that's certainly diminishing as we use up the old growth timber. But still, I'm still getting deeper and deeper into Mendocino and Humboldt counties and beyond, where you find people who maybe a woodworker is getting older and he's got a barn full of slabs,
right, and
they want to offload them. On the East Coast, there's just it seems to me like a great many places.
It's true. I think it's easier on the East Coast. I was just on a road trip in Pennsylvania, in mid-state Pennsylvania, and if you're ever there, you've got to go to Alderfer, Alderfer lumber. This guy's got barnfuls of slabs, and he's an expert at milling slabs and flattening slabs and drying them and getting them to you with the least amount of flattening that you need to do. And it's just an amazing. We do have an embarrassment of riches in the Northeast for sure.
I was going to say Pennsylvania seems to be particularly a gold mine.
Totally.
But all those states, from Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, all the way to the East Coast.
So if people dig around to the lumber yards, they might have to drive an hour or two, but they may just find some great stuff.
Yeah, and depending on your location, it might be oak and maple and walnut, or
Yeah.
it might be mesquite, it might be manzanita, it might be eucalyptus.
And you can make great furniture out of most of that stuff.
You can. And,
Yeah.
And, you know, the species will sometimes determine what it is you can make. I think it's probably more rarefied to find big, wide slabs, especially, I mean, by now, you know, high-end furniture companies, even the guys I deal with, if they find a felled redwood tree on somebody's ranch or somebody's taken down a big old walnut, they know they can get a hold of these big companies and sell all the choice slabs. There's a guy there's an investor who isn't even really a woodworker, but somehow he got hipped to slab furniture.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my woodcutters is in this guy's pocket.
Oh.
And any massive walnut tree that comes down, this guy's outbidding anybody because he's from like a startup. He's a Silicon Valley guy. So he's paying more than I can afford, but still getting a great deal, and he just buys whole trees.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't compete with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just you find the guys, usually there are big operations that are ongoing, have a relationship where they're selling to big furniture companies, and I try to find a tier or two below that guy, you know, and you go through their scrap piles, and there's always treasures. The first couple offcuts of any boule, most people will throw away, but you know, those of us in fine woodworking know you flip that thing over and you've got a really beautiful tabletop.
In the showbiz world, I think of you kind of as woodworking's a journey, and woodworking is all about exploring. But in the showbiz world, I think you kind of do the same thing. So if people don't know, obviously your big break came with Parks and Rec, which was an NBC comedy that just finished up a super long run, and you still work in movies and TV and commercials, but you've steered your proverbial canoe into stand-up comedy and storytelling. Talk real quick about your latest stand-up show and how it's different from the first one you did.
Well,
For those few out there who are interested in these things like I am.
are you referring to Summer of '69?
I am referring to Summer of '69.
That's a show that my wife and I created together. We're having a great time. My wife, Megan Mullally, who was on Will and Grace, is just an incredible goddess of the stage and screen, and she's an incredible singer. She's ridiculously talented, and that makes me a super lucky bastard. She also is a very high-end designer of our home, and I'm lucky that she has an affinity for a few fine woodworking pieces.
Does she tell you when the clothes you're wearing are stupid?
Absolutely. I learned long ago to simply ask before I need to be
Venturing
told,
outside.
honey, is this okay?
Part of your other showbiz explorations is you become a book author. You did Paddle Your Own Canoe, which really talked about, for folks out there who want to know more about what it's like to grow up around farm communities, but then make it all the way to L.A. as in show business, like Nick has, and about all the interesting things that happen along the way. And kind of Nick's Rules for Prosperity, which he put out there in his first show, American Ham. It's a great book, but that was so successful, you did a second book that just came out called Gumption, where you turn the spotlight onto off your narcissistic self and onto other people that you admire. And you do talk about woodworking in Paddle Your Own Canoe for sure, so people can look for that. But in Gumption, you feature some woodworkers as the people you admire.
I do, yeah. I mean, the point of Gumption was it's a sort of a mixtape of 21 great Americans who inspire me, starting with George Washington and Ben Franklin, and going all the way through contemporary figures like Yoko Ono and Conan O'Brien.
I liked the early chapters a lot because I didn't really pay attention in history class, and I learned a ton about some of these people. Like, I knew Ben Franklin was a badass, but I mean, he was incredible.
He was. Frederick Douglass, I was astonished to learn, had a long history of boat building. But yeah, I mean, for me, history sticks with me a lot better if you can humanize the characters. And so I remembered the bullet points of the Revolutionary War, but then reading more as a grown-up about the lives of people like Washington and James Madison and Eleanor Roosevelt and Frederick Law Olmsted makes them much more human, because I can now put myself in their shoes and feel the weight of their responsibilities and admire the choices they made and the ground they stood. And sort of the idea of the book was through the lens of looking at these muckrakers, firebrands, if you will, to try and determine what it is that I can remind myself to pay attention to become a more decent citizen. And part of that involves staying busy in work that I love, which in my case is woodworking and also creating entertainment. But so it was important to me. George Nakashima is in the book. Nat Benjamin, who is half of the Benjamin and Gannon Marine Railway in Martha's Vineyard, possibly our most heroic boat builders living today in America. Thomas Lee Nielsen, who builds the finest woodworking tools up in Maine, and it was very important to me to highlight people who have made a really delicious living. Again, all of these guys would be the first to tell you they don't ever expect to get rich and buy a Maserati, but they've learned that that's not how a rich man lives. You can ride a horse to town and be much more of a king.
I think woodworkers know that on some level.
I think so. I mean, it's rather a perverse choice to make in this age of social media and people just like losing themselves in some sort of screen all day long. Woodworkers somehow understand that an obsession with the tangible handcrafted problem solving that can be achieved in a shop is actually really good life medicine.
I know you started, just to finish up, I know you've really marked a lot of territory in the arts world. You've done everything from kabuki theater, now you're authoring books, you do stand-up comedy in kind of a humorous vein, you've been on TV. So what other territories do you plan to mark? Where else will you be spreading the Offerman essence, like painting, ballet?
I shouldn't be surprised if I have a massive ballet hit at some point. No, I'm astonished. I'm very much a self-proclaimed jackass, and I am very grateful that people are responding to what I put out. I never dreamed I would publish books like this. I mean, my third book that I've started is going to be about my wood shop and woodworking, which I'm really excited about. And, as long as somebody will keep saying they'll publish them, I'll keep putting them out. And I have no inclination in trying any other arenas. It's all I can do to fit everything in right now. I'm getting ready to work in the theater, which is my, that's what I'm trained to do as a professional. That was my college degree, and my early adult life was all in professional theater in Chicago. And so I'm going to be doing a production of A Confederacy of Dunces at the Huntington Theater in Boston this winter, starting November 11th, running through late December. And we're hoping that it'll go well, and then maybe we'll take it to New York.
And that's how it works. It starts in a sort of medium-sized market, and then you hope that it gets to New York and gets
if
picked
you
up
don't
on
have
Broadway.
Jude Law in the show,
Right.
then you have to try it out in another town, and then the bankers come and say, "All right, we'll roll the dice on this jerk, or not."
Yeah.
And that's going to be a wonderful return to my roots. I love theater more than any other form of acting, because the audience and you exchange medicine in a way that's just much more prevalent and lively than the colder format of filming what you do and then sending it out to theaters.
One thing I loved when I was lucky enough, Nick got a few woodworking folks to come on an episode of Parks and Rec, and when I was there, actually, I really liked how all the folks in the crew would actually crack up and give you guys feedback for some of the comedy you were doing. That was kind of a cool thing. But I know what you're saying. Like, there's nothing like, I'm sure for you, just play, especially on a movie set, you get nothing. So just playing to these live audiences, I totally get it. And if any of you guys out there ever have a chance to see any of Nick's shows, they're really great. They're really inspiring, and they're grounded. And I think we have Woodworking to thank for a lot of that. And I know you got to take off. So I want to say thanks. And also thanks for being so kind to Fine Woodworking all these years. Ever since I met you, you've said and done so many good things for the magazine. I think my favorite moment was you managed to wrangle yourself onto the cover of the magazine, and then you took it onto Letterman's show, which was great. And hearing Letterman read cover lines from Fine Woodworking
And make fun of us.
and make fun of them and say, what is wrong with you people, was so great.
Yeah, it was really fun to have him make fun of, like, read our headlines as though that was a better joke than he could ever come up with.
It kind of was.
It was. Well, I appreciate it. I mean, as I've often said, that's Fine Woodworking was handed to me, and through reading its pages, that's how I became a woodworker. And so it's the school at which I continue to learn, and it's a great privilege to have you over and to make any kind of contribution. I'll look forward to keeping this relationship up if you'll have me.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Nick.
My pleasure.
Over and out.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it.
Yes.
Nick Offerman.
Nice interview.
So I wanted to talk for a moment about something that maybe not as many people know about. I think the people who read our magazine already know he's big into slab tables. They already know who he is on television. But the interesting thing is the way he runs his shop. And I found that pretty inspiring. Now, obviously, not everybody could pull off what he has pulled off, because not everybody's making boku bucks in showbiz, and he's very honest about that. But this idea of all these woodworkers, basically they're all picking their own specialty, selling their own wares, and then contributing to the shop fund to keep the lights on is pretty awesome. And if you hear a beeping, I believe that's our phone.
We're getting a
in the
conference
studio.
call right now.
Yeah, we're in a conference call right now. We should actually answer it live on the podcast.
Yeah, it's probably the Taunton CEO calling the fire saw.
That's right. Anyhow, so I don't know. I have never heard of a model like this. It's sort of a...
It's pretty cool. It's almost more of a co-op,
A co-op,
or
yeah.
something. I mean, a lot of folks these days, especially if you're in urban areas or if you're younger, you don't have a house and a garage and a basement, or just the wherewithal to get a shop going. There's co-op shops available where you can pay on a monthly basis, get in there and make some stuff. But this is sort of taking it seems like a step further. It sounds like there's even some coordination. It sounds like there's even help in terms of getting jobs, maybe help marketing. It sounds like, it's like a pretty good gig if you're a young woodworker and don't really know how to get going. Give Nick a call, maybe get a job in his shop.
That's right. If you want to reach Nick, it's 555-5555. And I don't know. I kind of find it, and no joke, I've kind of found it inspiring. And the people he has working with him, like Lee, I think we all met once at Fine Woodworking Live.
She was, the first time we're going to live.
So she's his shop manager, and she sort of divvies up the work. Like, okay, you're a specialist in boxes, you're going to handle this commission, and you're a and she's a talented designer in her own right. She has sort of a minimalist flair about her. But I don't know, they've got a cool team. I kind of dig them.
Can minimalism have a flair?
Indeed.
Okay.
Yes, we're
Matthew.
going to talk about that in just a minute.
Yes.
For 15 minutes.
But anyhow, so there you go.
Absolutely
So-
no joking.
Well, I mean, it's cool that if you have someone like that, not just that it's Nick Offerman, but a person as a boss who's really, his goal is to basically provide a living for woodworkers instead of trying
There
to
you go.
squeeze as much profit out of any workforce as you can.
right.
It's probably a bad business model, and I hope it flies.
Well,
but,
I would
you know,
imagine, like I was saying, I would imagine it depends largely on the fact that he can help bankroll that shop if he needs to.
that's pretty awesome. I fantasize that if I ever had enough money to actually do something good in that way instead of just like spending it all on myself, but I probably would just do that.
Spend it all on yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, anyhow, you can look for an upcoming article with Nick on his slab table construction techniques
Cool.
in an upcoming issue. I can't remember which issue number it is, but it'll be soon.
That will complement the article that he already did for us, which was how to flatten a
How to
slab.
flatten big slabs, so next question, let's move on. It comes from Craig, who writes, I have a question about sanding joinery and how you handle it so the joinery doesn't get screwed up. Let's take a panel, for example, that's going into a dado. If you get the fit of that panel dialed in before you sand, your pieces inevitably will be too loose after you sand. I've tried to address this a couple of ways. Lately, I've been dry fitting my components, and I strike a line on my panel and do my best to not sand beyond the line. I've seen this talked about very little in woodworking instruction, albeit magazines or online videos. How do you guys handle this issue? Well, Craig,
Yeah.
we've actually handled this issue before,
On Shop Talk Live.
but but it is understandably, I think, something that people, it's the answer that these guys are going to tell you is going to make you go, oh, duh, because it's very simple. Am I right?
It
Couple
is.
ways, couple ways to solve it.
Yes.
In some instances, you want to pre-surface before you cut your joinery. Like, for instance, if you're dovetailing a drawer box, if you plane the front and back, your pins are going to get narrower and the fit's going to get looser if you plane that joint afterwards. So you plane it first, cut your joints, and they're tight.
Yep.
Something like the dados, you can take that route. Sanding tends to round things over, and it gives you not a good fit. We did talk about, we'll just go ahead and rabbet that shelf so that you can plane one face or sand one face, and it's not going to affect the fit. You could also rabbet both edges so you have a little tongue that fits into the dado. Then you can sand and plane away those two faces. It can get as skinny as it wants, but that tongue, as long as you don't touch that, you're going to have a tight fit in that
Yes.
joint.
Yeah. The way I do it is first the piece that is dadoed, I would surface or do the surface prep on that piece on the dado side before I cut the dados.
Okay.
Because if you cut the
can cut the
dado
dado
and
to
then you
fit the
hand
shelf.
plane it, you've just made your dado shallower.
Yeah.
Then I fit the drawer. Fit the shelf, and I use only a rabbet on the top. And so on the bottom, so what I do is I will do the surface prep on the bottom of the shelf, and then cut the dado.
The rabbet.
Cut the rabbet, and then when it's fit, I don't touch the bottom again. But the top now, you can do whatever you want
Right.
to because it won't affect the fit. So that's how I do those joints.
Yep.
It's basically what it comes down to is fitting shelves in a case with rabbets instead of
Yeah, the key here is
Dados.
instead of making a dado and then trying to plane
Right.
your shelf to the exact width of the dado,
rabbet your shelf end.
rabbet your shelf in to fit into the dado. And
It's a nice, elegant, simple solution.
yeah, yep.
Done. All right, Craig, there you go.
And I would say though, Mike said you could rabbet on both sides to get that tongue, which is something I would advocate only for smaller shelves. The bigger the shelf,
You
the
need more
larger the
purchase.
span it is. I would move to just the rabbet on the top, so that when the weight comes down, it's the bottom is all the way into the dado, and it's not like pushing down on the little tongue. You get what I mean there, Mike?
Yes, right.
But
Right.
that's
You know
only
what I mean
if-
there, Sparky?
Yeah, a lot of time. Well, like if you're inserting like a vertical divider,
that could be the double rabbits.
you double rabbit because
Yeah.
that really hides any gap that
Yes.
might show up from that dado getting exposed on one face or
Yeah.
the other.
On a shelf, though, it's normally not an issue.
Yep.
Because you don't see the bottom side. And
Or biscuit, just like biscuit that thing,
everything.
and there's no dado. Sand as much as you want, and it's gap free. I love biscuits.
Another alternative, drywall screws.
Yes,
And
Mike.
then what you can do, you can actually hide the head of the screw with a little bit of wood putty.
That's right, from the outside.
Yeah. Big tips. Good tips on Shop Talk Live this week. Heading into the next question, it comes
From
from
Mike, Buttermilk Biscuits Spekovich.
From Trey. Trey writes, longtime listener, first-time caller. I'm currently designing a record cabinet in the mid-century style. The only problem is most pieces in this style are made of teak, which I love, but it's gotten to be prohibitively expensive, as in more than $40 a board foot for a poor college student such as myself. Teak is definitely the right look, so what else can I do to achieve the look of teak without actually using teak? Is there anything besides the obvious answer of veneer or staining another species? If staining, what species would make a good candidate?
Start with ebony, bleach it, and then dye it to match the teak.
Hey.
Start with African blackwood, which is only about $90 a board foot. But actually, our answer to this question,
Yeah.
I've noticed that there is now, I think, what is the standard Shop Talk Live answer to any question. Someone writes in or emails in and says,
learn how to sharpen.
I've got this problem. Here's my solution. And our answer almost invariably is, well, you don't want to do that. And then we offer some alternative. That's what, like, every answer.
Because they're clearly unsure as to the how good a solution they've come up with, and there's a reason for that.
His question is, what can I do to get the look of teak without buying teak? And I know all three of our answers is going to be by not buying teak and trying to simulate teak. Don't even try.
Don't try.
Yeah. Go with a different wood.
Go with a different wood, because there are other woods that are perfectly suitable for mid-century modern furniture.
Sure.
For example,
Gentlemen,
walnut.
Cherry.
Yeah.
Go on.
You could do the one that is people use to make workbenches out of, beech.
Beech. I was going to say beech, birch,
Birch.
ash.
Ash.
I would keep the grain pretty tight. Go
On
ripped
ash.
or quarter
Ripped or
sawn.
quarter sawn, yes.
Yeah, a lot of furniture in the Danish modern style was made out of many species. So although teak has sort of become synonymous, I think you could go in just about anything. I mean, if you think of Sam Malouf, he worked in walnut. George Nakashima, James Krenov, who basically designed in the mid-century modern style, Danish modern. He an encyclopedia of hardwoods.
Quilla.
Pear.
Pear.
Here's another thing, and I'm not being facetious or sarcastic because I do have a sample of this. I've been wanting to do something with it for a while. I have a sort of a quarter of a full 4x8 sheet of 3/4 inch thick glued up bamboo.
Bamboo would be nice for mid-century
And it's sort
modern.
of glued up quarter sawn, and it's a really nice, that medium sort of chocolate brown like an English brown oak is.
Mike is treading dangerously close to my contribution to this question.
Oh, I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
You're actually going to contribute an answer?
Let me just pot Matt down. No. Go on, because I'll get mine after you, Mike.
So I do have this quarter sheet of bamboo. It's just been sitting in my shop forever, and I've been dying to, find an excuse to make something out of it, and I just haven't yet. But it's a great color. It is got sort of that techie look to it, but it's still organic. I would do that. The only problem is you can't buy it anywhere, unless you're like an interior designer architect and you buy like 3 truckloads.
Right.
That's actually not true. I think we did a look when we were going to do an article on bamboo or alternative wood sources, and I think we did find out that there were some
Places
sources
to buy,
at the time where you could buy it.
There's actually, this question really gets to the heart, because I just did something of a reproduction of a shaker piece for the magazine.
Yeah.
And it's going to be in the next issue that hits the newsstands.
Oh, did you?
Yes, I did know. And it gets, to just because you're making something mid-century modern doesn't mean you have to use the exact same wood species or the exact same joinery, et cetera, that they did. There's certainly a way to pick up on the spirit or the heart of a particular style of design and use it to make a new piece of furniture and not just follow everything slavishly. So you don't have to use teak. Mostly because there's other woods used, but you could use really modern furniture. What sort of is light, often light colored. So pick a wood that's light.
Or any of the African mahogany, sapele.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I had a vastly different idea. That might be a little weird, but I saw this in the offices of a fancy architectural firm in New York once. They had a lot of built-in cabinetry that they built out of expensive, albeit expensive, multiply that they laminated. They would laminate 2 sheets of 3/4 together and come up with an 1.5 inch thick, these 1.5 inch thick work pieces, and they would build this cabinetry and leave the edges exposed, and they were sanded, really, really finely sanded, and then finished, and it was awesome looking.
I bet.
It was really, really cool looking. So that's kind of departing a bit from what he's talking about, but it had a very distinctly, it had that blonde look, and it was distinctly modern, especially because of all the veneers that we're showing, and because it was a high quality wood. There were no gaps in the veneers. It was perfect. They were perfect lines.
And they're all really thin because it's probably
Yeah.
13 ply,
Right.
Yep.
so it looks nice.
And when you see that an inch and a half thick, it's like it's very stunning if it's done right. But
Yeah, actually, because I've made furniture out of multiply, where I left the edge exposed, and this actually something that I think would look really cool is to make modern mid-century modern furniture. So you make it out of plywood with that nice edge exposed, and then you could do something like paint it. Paint the outside, and you'd have this really cool contemporary take on mid-century modern furniture.
That'd be cool. I've seen it dyed as well, like with
dyed?
really bright aniline dyes.
Yeah.
Looks very cool.
all right. Well, listen, I say we head into our next segment of the week, and that's going to be all-time favorite technique of all time for this week, where we wax poetic about our most cherished and beloved woodworking techniques to the tune of the Romeo and Juliet suite Tchaikovsky. Thank you very much. Anyhow, so who's going first? How are we doing this? Seniority?
Mr. Boxy can go
Boxy?
first.
Oh, yes.
Snark Master Flex?
Snark Master Flex. We really need to cut down on the jokes, guys, because we're not funny.
No, we're not stand-up comedians.
No. Okay, so actually, I already sort of mentioned that I'm currently making, it's actually 39 boxes. Did I say 40 before? I'm not sure. 39 boxes right now, split up, but so 20 of one particular box and then 19 of the other. And one thing that both boxes share in common is a side that's 1 3/4 inches long. So one of the boxes is actually a little square that's 1 3/4 inches square. The other one is 5 by 1 3/4. So there's two tiny little boxes.
Oh, so you're making multiple copies of two different
Yes.
boxes.
Yeah, Mike,
So-
I'm not going to count them. Just calm down, Mike. Just relax.
2 different boxes.
Yeah. And when I make these boxes, or when I initially made these boxes, I was making one of them at a time, or a few at a time. And so I just did all the miters by hand and cross-cut them by hand and everything. And that worked great. But when you have actually 156 sides to cut, most of which are 1 3/4 inches long, you got to figure something else out to do. So what I ended up doing was making a cross-cut set specifically for the small parts. And so I still use my normal box sled for the bigger parts, and I'll also use it to miter everything. But to cut all of those short parts to length, for example, which is what I've done so far,
Now make sure you, if you're watching the video, we're going to put stills in the video, but if you're listening to the audio, make sure you really describe this well.
Yes, so it's a sled with a thing on it.
Okay.
No,
And that thing has the doohickey attached to the bottom of it.
Yeah, so I made a small sled, and overall, it looks like a lot of the sleds that I've made, in which you can see on Fine Woodworking if you look at my blogs for.
Looks like a crosscut sled.
Yeah, which camera should I be using there, cameraman Jeff? That's insult. You're more than just a cameraman to us, Jeff. So you can see this is just a normal crosscut sled with the addition of a gargantuan toggle clamp, which I used because of the long reach that it had. And that allowed me to locate the clamp far enough away from the blade, or far enough from the blade, but still be able to come down and clamp down on top of these tiny little parts. And so I was able to go very quickly using the stop block, guaranteeing that every side was the same length, quickly cut it, pop it up, lock it down, next one, and just quickly cycle through all these little parts.
Did you cut it and rotate it, or you did it in 2 separate stop block settings?
What do you mean?
Did you make that one miter cut and then rotate the workpiece 180 degrees?
This is not a miter cut.
Oh,
Remember, because when I make my boxes, I cut the sides to length first
okay.
and then miter them. I know Mike does not approve of this technique,
No,
but
okay.
it's brilliant.
So
Anyways,
it's 156 square cuts
yes,
and 156 miter cuts.
yeah, that's all right though.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's all good.
and they're all gonna have a 4-corner match. See, and it's gonna look nice. But yeah, I'll take this off, and actually, when I do the miters, I'll use the same thing. The only thing I would have changed though is instead of having the clamp in front of the piece of wood, which worked
Yeah.
well because of the
You have a
fences and
fence.
everything.
Right.
It would have been better if it were behind it, because when you lock down one of these toggle clamps like this, it actually pulls forward a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, that wasn't affecting my piece of wood, but it was pulling forward the caul that I had between
Yeah.
the workpiece and the toggle pad. And so it would have been behind it. It just would have pulled everything really tight against the fence. Like I
Right.
said, it didn't affect the workpiece. Everything came out square. So my favorite technique of all time is to get your fingers out of the way.
Yeah.
There you go.
Small parts like
Small
that.
parts.
Yep.
Yeah, just make something, and it's made specifically for these little tiny parts.
Yeah.
And just make something specific to the task. It didn't take me very long to make it, and it worked wonderfully.
That's very cool. And you think, oh, it's a little tiny box, so that's easy to do. It's like, not. It's its own engineering problem that you need to solve there.
Yes, because I've always made small, delicate things, and in my time here, I've had
Matt's music box theme.
different editors decide they want to make something small. And like Kelly Dutton once made this little, not even that small of a little jewelry box. And he started making it, and then he started coming over to me. He's like, oh my God, I didn't realize how hard this would be with everything so small. And I'm like, yeah, it's little tiny dovetails are not easy. You know, it's everything it's just as hard as on big stuff. It takes often takes a slightly different thought process.
Yeah, a little gap on a big piece
No big deal.
is a really big gap on a really small piece.
Yes. Same size gap on a tiny thing is really noticeable.
I work really big.
All right, I'll go next. We'll go left to right if you're watching this on video. So I had to
No,
build
right to left.
whatever. No, left to right. You're on the left.
Oh,
In the middle.
Yeah, if they're
All right.
if I'm watching on TV.
So I had to build a prop for an upcoming video on sanding that also covers a little bit of Mike's finishing technique, which is based off an article called Wiping Varnish, the last finish you'll ever need, or something like that.
I think so.
Something
along those
humble.
lines. Yeah, something humble like that. Mike's incredible, super refined, awesome finish.
It doesn't overpromise.
That's right. So
It is a great finish. It
one
is a
of
great
the
finish.
one of the steps in this wiping varnish technique is to wet sand at 600 with some 600 wet dry paper. And you know, I've wet sanded in the past, a couple of my humidors, but
Well,
yes,
because when you said wet sanded initially, when we were talking about this, I thought of one thing that I do when I finish.
So what I'm
why don't
referring
you
to
explain what you
in
mean
this
by
technique, you're putting down a couple coats of wiping varnish, you know, and then the third coat, you're wiping on a coat, and then you're taking that wet dry paper while the finish is still wet, and you're sanding it in, and then you're taking your lint-free cloth and you're just leveling the finish afterwards and letting it dry, and then moving on. And so I've wet sanded before a bit, but I've never used the technique on tables, things like that, you know, utilitarian furniture. I usually just hand plane, and then I'll sand with a really fine grit paper dry to get rid of any little track marks or anything after I use a card scraper, and that's it. So I start, and then I apply finish. So this was different for me. And this is the table. Not that you're going to be able to feel this in the video or in the audio.
No, we have feel-o-vision now.
You guys, we have feel-o-vision. It is.
Is it nice, man?
It is.
It looks nice.
It's really nice. It's wonderful.
Matt is shaking his head while he's agreeing. But it honestly, for like the little tables I've built and whatnot, it's the best finish I've ever gotten, and it's because of that wet sand. It's not
wet
even
sand.
done yet, and it's
What I like
I'm
about
sold.
you know, because Matt said, well, you can dry sand between coats. And what I do like about the wet sanding is that extra little bit of lubrication from the finish, it does two things. It keeps the sandpaper from getting clogged up with the finish. And number two, it allows a really fine sandpaper to cut really aggressively. So you could wet sand with 600 grit sandpaper, and it's getting rid of all the dust nibs and raised grain
Yes.
really, really well. But you're left with a really fine scratch pattern.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that wet sanding is really cool.
It's just most of the time I'm using shellac as my finish.
Don't wet sand with shellac.
Don't wet sand.
Well, don't with the shellac wet. Yeah.
When the shellac is wet. Plus, it dries too fast. You can't
Yes.
really. I use
You use
Mike's,
tar.
I use Mike's ultimate
Right.
best ever, last thing you'll ever need,
Super
supreme awesome finish on big stuff.
Right.
But on my little stuff and like little wall cabinets, I use shellac and I wet sand. But this is where my confusion came in when you started talking about this, was because what I think of wet sanding is my first coat of shellac goes on and it dries. Then I get out the mineral spirits and 600 grit wet dry paper and wet the sandpaper.
You lubricate the sandpaper.
And it does the same thing.
Right.
But it's just a
Different method, different technique.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm sold. I love it. You can look for that. I believe that video will be coming out with issue 250, which will hit your homes about October 13th. So it should be around about that time. So, Mike,
Cool.
what do you got?
Well, earlier,
Let me
Matt,
put
you
this away to
mentioned
make sure it's not a pencil. Take your pencil
And
away.
this time
here.
it's an eraser.
this is we're technique, not tool.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Matt mentioned, is there such a thing as minimalism with flair? And that actually speaks to my technique of favorite of all time for this week is
Is it your Paisley Carhartt T-shirt?
no. Is
Paisley Carhartt underpants.
the tapered chamfer.
The tapered
Ooh,
chamfer.
Ooh, this is
Chamfer.
interesting. That's usually what happens by mistake with me.
Yes, it's something. Well, yes, intent is the key phrase here. I'm working on this little Krenov style caisson stand, and I've been working on the base, and I was trying to get the legs just right in terms of, I wanted a little bit of a flare at the bottom. I wanted just a very slight flare as the legs, reach the top toward the case itself. But every time I tried to saw these curves into these legs, it was way too exaggerated because any curve you cut on one face, by the time you rotate that in 3 dimensions, everything was like way exaggerated. So with these mock-up legs, I had these horrible bell-bottom legs that flared way out at the top, and I kept sawing them flatter and flatter and flatter and flatter, almost getting them back to square. And so I needed a way to sort of impart some curves in the piece that was more subtle and more easily controlled than just actually sawing those faces. So I started with a leg that was tapered. There's a very, very slight concave curve to it, but maybe less than a 1/16 of an inch concave over the entire length of this 33-inch leg. So basically flat. But the way I was able to instill a sense of curve to the piece was by chamfering the corners of the leg, starting basically at 0 at the top and then going wider in the upper third and then back to 0 or so at the bottom of the leg. And by creating this tapered chamfer, it basically created the illusion that this leg was cut in a curve. And it allowed me to create these very, very subtle, quiet curves in a very controlled manner in a way that I just wasn't able to create by actually shaping legs in those forms.
Sounds like we have a potential upcoming article. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
So maybe I can post a picture of this cabinet on the website.
Totally.
Cool.
I'll probably forget to do it and get, loaded with emails like, why do you always forget to put the link in that you talk about, or the photo? Which I don't begrudge anyone for writing me that. I just wish you would come see the state of my desk. That would give you an idea of how busy a person I am. Not that I'm making excuses.
You could come in for 1 hour and hear the number of sighs that
Yeah,
I
I
hear
know.
coming out of Ed's cubicle.
Anyhow. All right. We get lots of comments on our page in the iTunes store as well as through email. And every week, I like to acknowledge the kind folks who leave words of encouragement up there. So here we go. From Cave Artist, the early days of this show were rough cut, but stick with it. These guys have earned a 5-star rating for a fine podcast, informative and entertaining. This is one of my favorites. From Jurgen01, love the show, keep up the interesting work. And finally, from Kevin0611, great pod. It's scary how much these guys know about woodworking. I mean, seriously scary. Like they need professional psychiatric help scary. A perfect blend of information, conversation, and humor. Oh, and please force Mike Pekovich to design a piece with each issue. His work always rocks. With that about wraps it up this week for Shop Talk Live. We'll be back again in 2 weeks on September 25th, 2015 for our next episode. In the meantime, show us a little love by stopping over at our iTunes page, leaving a comment, maybe a 5-star rating. Don't forget to send your questions and comments into shoptalk@taunton.com. You can catch the podcast via iTunes, stream it on your computer at shoptalklive.com, or catch us on iHeartRadio. Cheers, everybody. done.